I came because George insisted, but everyone here is wearing cheap clothes and talking about boring stuff. I couldn't have endured it if it wasn't the last time. Last time? As I tilted my head, Michelle smiled slyly. You know, a rotten orange spoils the bunch. I want to avoid that. Imagine if I had kids in the future? Having a grandfather who's a college dropout and works in a factory would be a terrible influence. Without caring about the stunned silence around her, Michelle spoke loudly. Low education and poverty are a family's shame. I don't want stupidity to rub off on me, so I'm cutting ties. Michelle! The room fell dead silent. All eyes were on Michelle. Everyone stared at her as if glaring, and she was the focus of everyone's attention. Having a high education doesn't make you superior. If you get too comfortable with that idea, someday you'll face serious consequences. Michelle will learn that the hard way. I am Sally, a 63-year-old housewife. Although I'm a housewife, I help out with my husband, Tyler's work when extra hands are needed. Tyler started working at his current factory as soon as he graduated from high school. He worked diligently and was entrusted with managing the factory 20 years ago. He's a man of effort. Though he was criticized for not going to college, working seriously for decades is no easy feat. I'm proud of Tyler for accomplishing that. We, Tyler and I, have decided to live just the two of us now. Because our only child, George, has found a job and decided to move out. We're back to living as a couple for the first time in a long while. Though it's not new, it's filled with a sense of security. We've been married for 43 years and are still happily together. I hope George finds someone like us if he gets married. Someone he can get along with for a long time. That's my secret wish. But even after turning 30, George never introduced a girlfriend. Maybe marriage is far off for him. Will we ever see our grandchildren? Tyler and I would joke about this until one day, George finally brought home his first girlfriend. Her name was Michelle, a sharp-looking woman. She visited us in a suit, apparently the same age as George, 33. Her strong character seemed to show through her appearance, making her look older than George. Hello, Sally and Tyler. Nice to meet you. Her confident greeting overwhelmed us. It was due to the aura she carried, but also because of what George had told us. Michelle was a true elite, highly educated. I graduated from graduate school. So did my parents. Her fluent speech definitely had an elite feel to it. In front of her, we were at a loss for words. Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Sally, his mother. And I'm Tyler, his father. Nice to meet you. Michelle was with a smile, then observed us intently. What was she looking at? What's up? May I ask about your highest education level? Which college did you both graduate from? College? Tyler and I froze at this question. We didn't study after graduating high school. We were puzzled about how to respond when George quickly stepped in. Neither of my parents went to college. They've been helping out at the factory since they were young. Huh? A factory? Michelle's neatly groomed eyebrows twitched with skepticism. Yeah, Dad has been working since he was 15. Now he's even managing the place. 15? Wait, hold on. You mean they didn't even finish college? I could see a clear change in Michelle's expression. Especially her eyes, they were completely different from before. Cold. Yeah. Dad dropped out of college. That gave him a lot of work experience, so people trust him. He's got a lot of connections, too. George meant it as a brag about his dad, but I wasn't sure if it was getting through to Michelle. She just muttered him and kept giving short replies. After that, she hardly initiated any conversation. This is bad. I might have let George down. Tyler. I felt a tightness in my chest hearing Tyler's sad tone. From what I saw today, it was clear that Michelle valued education highly. In that case, our family was in the worst position. Tyler and I, from society's perspective, are considered minimally educated. I've regretted not pursuing further education more than once or twice. But it was difficult back in our time. Without financial freedom, college wasn't an option. Certainly not for our families. So, we did the best within our capabilities. We lived our lives with pride. Never ashamed of our low education. But I never thought it would hold back our son. If George gets dumped because of this, I'd feel terrible. It's gonna be all right. I'm sure it'll be okay. Though I said this to encourage him, I was just as anxious as Tyler. Surprisingly, George and Michelle continued dating and eventually got married. Despite my worries about Michelle's attitude and words back then, if George chose her, she must be right. We trusted George. But the newlywed couple, my son and his wife, didn't visit us much. They lived in the same state, but both seemed busy with their work. George's company is well known, so that was understandable. Michelle must be working hard, too. As long as the two of them were happy, that was enough for us. Tyler and I just wished for their happiness. However, we had a chance to meet them after a long time. It was during the Christmas holiday family gathering. Every year, we invite relatives over for meals and drinks. It's become a yearly tradition. This time, George and Michelle were coming, too. I was unusually nervous about seeing Michelle again. What if the topic of education came up again and she showed the same blatant attitude? I wouldn't know what to do. That was my honest feeling. I didn't want to see Tyler hurt again. I was done with that cold atmosphere. Tyler seemed to share my concerns, giving a wry smile. Should be happy to see our son and his wife, but here I am, all jittery. It's kind of pathetic, isn't it? Tyler muttered, looking somewhat sad. And so, with our nerves still on edge, we met Michelle again. George was going to be a bit late, as he had to park the car a bit away. Michelle arrived first, and I greeted her with a smile. Welcome. It's been a while. Have you been well? I tried to keep a smile on my face, even though it felt strained. Then, Michelle returned the smile warmly. Just as I was feeling relieved to see her smile. She said something that shocked me. Long time no see. Today, I came to make my final assessment. Assessment? Michelle nodded affirmatively. You know, Sally, you guys are just high school graduates, right? Indeed, our educational levels were exactly as Michelle just mentioned. But what did that have to do with anything? As I stood there dumbfounded, Michelle started chuckling. Come on. Can't you understand even after I spelled it out? This is why conversations with the less educated are so exhausting. What do you mean? I was clearly being mocked. While I was surprised by Michelle's attitude, I tried not to show it and squeezed out my words. Oh, Sally, you look so scary. Look, even if the parents are a disappointment, I thought maybe there'd be at least one decent person among the relatives. That's why I decided to come today. It would be nice if you could redeem your family's reputation. I was appalled at her audacity to say such a thing. Basically, Michelle was calling our education levels a disgrace. Do you realize how rude you're being? I couldn't help but raise my voice. True, Tyler and I weren't highly educated, and that might not be something to boast about in society. But that didn't mean we deserved to be called a disgrace. Oh dear, people without peace of mind get angry so quickly. You're the one who's provoking me. There you go, blaming others. Just as I thought. If I keep this up, I'll end up like you, Sally. That would be a nuisance to my family. Michelle covered her mouth with her hand and chuckled, seemingly amused at me. Hey! Michelle! I tried to scold her, but just then, George arrived. What's wrong, Mom? You look upset. Right now, I was at a loss for words. I was too angry to speak. George looked at me puzzled, then started chatting amiably with Michelle, and they moved away. I was left there, feeling like crying out of frustration. Even after she said all that, I couldn't even respond. In this awkward atmosphere, our reunion took place. Soon, the rest of the relatives started arriving one after another. As it was an annual event, everyone was quite used to it. The great thing about our family is that regardless of age or gender, those who can help out do so. While I and the caterer prepare the food in advance, if we run out of drinks, whoever wants more goes to get it. If someone needs a cup, they find it themselves. I think it's wonderful how everyone enjoys themselves. After a while, everyone started to slow down on their drinks. There probably wouldn't be any need for more food. I left the kitchen and joined everyone in the spacious living room. It was lively and bustling. Despite feeling nostalgic about the boisterous atmosphere after a year, I couldn't stop thinking about Michelle. She had declared such things to me earlier. I wanted to talk to her before she said something rude to the other relatives. I tried to find a moment to talk to her, but it was difficult as the newlywed couple, my son and his wife, were always surrounded, especially since they were meeting many people for the first time. While I was waiting for the right moment, one of the relatives spoke to Michelle. "How's it going? Getting along well with your husband? Marrying such a beauty. Tyler's boy George might be clumsy, but please take good care of him." Watching the relative put his arm around George, Michelle answered rapidly. "Don't worry. Tyler and George are completely different. Please don't lump them together." Huh. Okay. Tyler might have dropped out of college and worked in a factory, but my George graduated from college and works at a major company. It's ridiculous to call him clumsy. Michelle glanced at Tyler and covered her mouth, snickering. When George brought me to his home, I was so surprised. Such an old and poor-looking house, and his father a middle school dropout? It's like the crow gave birth to a hawk. No, more like a hawk hatched from a crow's egg. Michelle laughed out loud. Everyone around was stunned by her unexpected response. That's when it happened. A loud crash sounded as a beer bottle toppled over. "Oh no! This is the worst! It got on my clothes!" "Michelle, let's wipe it off over here." George started wiping Michelle's clothes with a napkin. Everyone was watching them with a mocking gaze. "If this doesn't come out, you're taking responsibility," Michelle grumbled, and someone quietly remarked. "She spilled it herself and then gets upset about it. Is this what they call elite? Blaming others and being smooth-talking." This was followed by a murmur of agreement from the crowd. If she's so quick to look down on others for being poor, she shouldn't make such a fuss over a little stain. George really has no eye for women. To add insult to injury, a child pointed at Michelle and asked, "Why is that lady getting mad about being wiped? Can't she do it herself?" "What?" Michelle's face flushed red with anger. "Michelle, maybe you should change in the back." "What? You want me to wear Sally's clothes? You must be joking." I certainly didn't want to lend anything to her. "Calm down, Michelle." George reached out to her, but she shook his hand off and shouted, "I came here because George insisted, but all of you are wearing cheap clothes and talking about nothing interesting. I couldn't have endured it if it wasn't the last time." "Last time?" As I tilted my head, Michelle smirked. "You know, one rotten orange spoils the bunch. I want to avoid that. Think about it, if we have kids in the future? A grandfather who dropped out of college and works in a factory would be a terrible influence." Ignoring the stunned silence around her, Michelle spoke loudly. "Low education and poverty are a family's shame. I don't want stupidity to rub off on me, so I'm cutting ties." "Michelle!" The room fell into a deafening silence. All eyes were on Michelle. Everyone was staring at her as if glaring. Suddenly, Tyler stood up and approached the couple. With a stern face, he said firmly, "Leave right now." "Dad, but we understand your values well enough. We have our pride too. It's a disconnection then. Fine by us. We don't want an elitist attitude like yours rubbing off on us either." Michelle, seemingly not expecting a rebuttal, looked embarrassed and avoided eye contact. Then, George forcefully grabbed Michelle's arm and the couple left the house. The party eventually resumed. The main topic was, of course, my son and his wife. Tyler and I were encouraged by all the relatives, telling us, "You two have worked hard. You should be proud of that." Some even said, "If it comes down to it, we'll support you." Most of them expressed never wanting to associate with my son and his wife again. Later, George visited our house alone. He apologized first for Michelle's behavior. "I knew she was a bit strong in that belief ever since we were dating." "That's an understatement. She's got issues." George laughed awkwardly. As parents, we wished he would divorce her and come back home, but we couldn't say that to our independent, grown-up son. "Clearly, after what she said, we don't ever want to see Michelle again. It'll be sad not to see you, but if it's a disconnection, we accept it." "Yeah, well, I guess so." George gave a somewhat hesitant reply before changing the subject completely. "Hey, Mom and Dad, ever thought about relocating?" "Relocating?" His sudden question took us by surprise, but George started explaining. "There's this beautiful island. How about living there, taking it easy and doing some farming? Doesn't that sound interesting?" It turned out an old friend of his had started farming there, and George was invited to join. "But we're getting on in years, and we've never farmed before." Dad, you were talking about retiring soon, right? You said you've handed most of your work over to your subordinates. This was news to me. Really? Yeah, my eyesight's getting worse. That part is true as George says. But why does that lead to relocating and farming? It's different, but manufacturing in a factory and farming have one thing in common: they both produce things. I think you'd do well, Dad. And George added, they say the island is really beautiful. Like moving to a resort area. Doesn't that get you excited? If we're going, it's now or never. George's pitch sounded like something from a TV infomercial, making Tyler and me look at each other and laugh. The mood had completely changed from talking about disownment just a moment ago. I wanted to talk about this too because, well, I have something I need to discuss. Then, George turned serious and broached a particular subject with us. Are you sure about this? After hearing him out, Tyler asked, a complex expression on his face. I wasn't feeling too calm about it either. But George seemed determined. Yeah. Even if it takes time, it's safer this way. Considering George's suggestion, we decided to accept his proposal. After that, we moved and relocated. It was all new to us, almost like we decided on a whim. Though there were some uncertainties, life after moving turned out to be surprisingly smooth. Life on the island was enjoyable and comfortable, more than we had ever imagined. Tyler even found joy in farming, getting along well with the neighbors. About a year into this new life, we received a call from a familiar person. Michelle. Where's George? Let me talk to him. As soon as I answered, Michelle yelled. What? I'm asking for George's whereabouts. What's going on? Why suddenly? Michelle, almost hysterical, started explaining. He's gone. This is serious. Tell me where he is now. Useless. I don't know what to say. Right, Tyler? I put her on speaker and looked at Tyler standing next to me. Well, we're just low-educated folks, aren't we? And besides, didn't we agree on disownment? No obligation to help then. But, wait. Just find George and tell him I cried and apologized. I'll call back. You hear me? With that, Michelle hung up. A few days later, she called again. Like I said before, we can't and won't do anything for you. What? Your son's causing me trouble, so as his parents, you should. Trouble? You're the one who's always shifting the blame. But it started with your affair, didn't it? I could hear Michelle gasp over the phone. George told you? He did, didn't he? Yes, he did. He's proceeding with the divorce. Divorce? Michelle's voice cracked. Clearly shaken. It made sense. She was facing ruin. Wait. You can't just leave me and divorce me like this. Well, you did spill company secrets to your affair partner, didn't you, Michelle? That was what George had told us. Michelle had an affair behind George's back and, to make matters worse, she ended up telling all the company's confidential information to her lover. It got out at the company, and now she's panicking, trying to figure out what to do. Knowing all that, being an elite must be tough. You have to be careful even with your lovers. I mean, who could have thought he'd be an employee of a rival company? But then again, having an affair in the first place is the real issue, isn't it? Michelle was trying to say something, but her words were muffled and incoherent. The family lawyers, all united, are preparing to go full force into the divorce with you. Lawyers? What? After that day, George had apologized to every relative and somehow managed to reconcile. Moreover, Michelle might have looked down on us, but our family is far from foolish. Tyler had just lacked the opportunity to pursue further education, but he managed to achieve results in his factory work. And among our relatives, there are several lawyers and even more who respect Tyler. That's the situation. You made quite a few enemies that day. But that's... No way! That's unfair! You just didn't have the eye for people, did you? Well, I hope George learns to better judge people, especially women, from now on. We're going to corner her with the entire family behind us. Perhaps sensing our intent, Michelle's voice trembled. But it was just a moment of folly. A moment of folly can ruin a life, can't it? Oh, sorry. We still don't know what will become of your life, do we? Please, I'm sorry, I'll apologize. Michelle was crying and begging on the phone. After all her arrogance, to end up self-destructing and relying on others, how ironic. It's a bit too much for us to clean up after an elite like you. And maybe you should focus less on educational background and more on learning some basic human decency? Michelle was still ranting, but I felt a wave of relief as I hung up the phone. Thanks to our relatives' efforts, the divorce went through. Michelle was forced to resign from her company. She returned to her elite family's home, only to be disowned with the words, "You're a disgrace to our family. You have no place here." Desperate, she turned to friends, but everyone rejected her. Nobody was willing to help her. Resigned, Michelle started looking for day jobs to scrape by. It was a shocking example of how quickly a high-educated person could fall from grace. As for our son, he went on a trip abroad. The day he came to apologize, George told us, "I'm considering divorcing Michelle." After that day, we talked and realized our values are just too different. When I brought up divorce, she threatened to sue, so I can't do it right away. But she'll slip up eventually, and I'll endure until then. For safety, I'd like you and Mom to stay hidden in your new home in case Michelle comes after you. Our relocation was, in part, to physically distance ourselves from Michelle if she ever came to us for help. George, always kind-hearted and easily swayed, must have thought of this himself. When the affair came to light, he hid, and after the divorce was final, he left for abroad before she could cling to him. He was more prepared than we thought. Thanks to him, we're now enjoying such a happy retirement. We've blocked her calls, so we're truly strangers now. We'll never have to see her face again. In the end, whether you're highly educated or not, it's all up to the individual. There's no need to judge others based on that. Rather than doing so, it's better to strive to be a wonderful person like Tyler. I'm so happy to have met someone like him.